Hello again everybody, back with another video. This time looking at this rollout of the NHS test and trace in the UK. This one being presented by Matt Hanscock, and as you will see, he brings in Baroness Dildo to help, and both of them end up doing a little smile and a little chuckle during the presentation.
Of those who tested positive for coronavirus across all settings, 37,460 people have sadly died. And since yesterday, 412 deaths have been recorded. We mourn them and we will not forget them.
Did you notice he didn't say died from the disease? He says of those who tested positive died. And a little shout out here for a video from The Love of Truth, where he talks about this very clever ploy of not actually saying they died with COVID. I've put a link in the description to that video. Very interesting video.
As I said yesterday, thanks to your effort and sacrifice, we are past the peak. We flattened the curve. We protected the NHS. And the big question that we're all working to answer is this. Until an effective treatment or vaccine comes through, how can we get back to doing more of the things that make life worth living without risking safety or putting lives at risk?
So he's reinforcing you need a vaccine to get life back to nearly normal, but they've got to do lots and lots of more repression to give you a few freedoms back to make life worth living, which is admitting that they're making life not worth living.
NHS test and trace is a big part, not the only part, but a big part of the answer to that question. NHS test and trace means we can start to replace the national lockdown with individual isolation for those who've been in contact with the virus and local action where it's necessary to respond to a flare-up.
So that's isolation for if you've been into contact with somebody that tested positive. And he's going to have local lockdowns. So they're going to barrier off your street and lock everybody in. Is that what he means? I think it is.
The concept is simple. First, through testing, we hunt down the virus, finding out who is infected right now. And I use we very deliberately because we all have our part to play.
Notice the terminology, folks. He uses we. Well, I'm not part of your gang, mate. I can tell you that straight away. And they're starting to talk about the virus like it's some wild animal that we have to track down and kill.
This is a national effort and we all have a role. If you have symptoms, you must isolate immediately and get yourself a test.
So these symptoms are a persistent cough, a fever, and loss of smell and taste, which you can get with a common cold. Just depends on the severity. So if you get a cold, you've got to isolate yourself immediately and get a test.
Yesterday, 2013 people tested positive, and the next step is that through contact tracing, like detectives, the NHS clinician from NHS Test and Trace and the person who's tested positive work together to identify the possible movements of the virus, where it's been, and who else it might have infected.
So the person is interrogated like a criminal and comes up with all the names of people they've been into contact with, and they're tracked down and they're made to isolate for 14 days. That's wonderful. You might not even know anything about this. And this is a way out of a lockdown.
Then we isolate those contacts who might have been infected so the virus is unable to spread and we break the chain of transmission.
Personifying the virus again, making it look like a predator.
Think of it like this. The virus exists only to reproduce. That is its sole biological purpose, to make as many copies of itself as possible. If we can thwart that purpose, we can control the virus and ultimately defeat it.
So this fake bug that they've made up and implanted in people's heads, even by their own science, is a chunk of dead protein. And that has a purpose. It's driven. It has a mind, a soul, and it's going out there to kill you. Is that what they're saying?
We must all follow the NHS test and trace instructions, because this is how we control the virus and protect the NHS and save lives.
He's using that word must again, and you must follow it if you actually believe in all this nonsense. I don't believe in all this nonsense. So if I get a cold, I get a cold. I'm not phoning anybody up. You can get stuffed.
Some people have asked, why now? Why not launch this program earlier in the course of the pandemic? The answer is because we needed to flatten the curve. Right at the start of the epidemic, we had a contact tracing system in place, but as the virus raged towards its peak, the number of infections grew so large that we needed a national lockdown. That was the only way to get it under control. Effectively, everyone in the country was contacted and told to stay at home.
So now the cases are coming right down, and they're going to impose more draconian individual isolations and local lockdowns, and we're well past the end of the flu season, which finished here at the end of April, and now it's baking hot and people are walking around in face masks and gloves and driving the cars in isolation in face masks and gloves. The world's is bloody crazy.
Now we've got the number of new infections each day right down, and the number of contacts of those who've tested positive is small enough that we can be in touch with everyone who we need to. And of course, testing capacity is critical to making this work. We now have the capacity for 161,000 tests a day. And because of that increased capacity, I can announce that we're expanding eligibility yet further. From tomorrow, we're expanding eligibility for testing to include the under 5s, so that now every single person who has symptoms of coronavirus can get a test.
So they're actually making the situation even worse. Now your children under 5s are going to be tested. So if they're tested positive and they isolate and you isolate, how the hell are you going to look after your kids? This is absolutely ludicrous, folks. It's mad. Why are you swallowing it?
No matter their age. And what's more, to make NHS test and trace as effective as possible, it is very important that everyone with symptoms must isolate immediately and go and get a test.
They're turning a cold into this COVID-19. So anybody that gets a cold has to get a test. You use must again. And just bear in mind, on average, an adult has a cold 3 times a year and it lasts 9 days.
And what really matters is this: to protect your friends and your family, testing and tracing must become a new way of life.
So you heard that, guys? Your new way of life is test and trace. So gone is the old life, and your main concern now to protect everybody from a fake bug is to constantly get tested and traced. Wonderful. This Polly Puppet and his Freemasonic leaders are first-class pieces of shite.
If you get symptoms, isolate immediately and get a test. If you are contacted by NHS Test and Trace instructing you to isolate, you must. It is your civic duty. So you avoid unknowingly spreading the virus, and you help to break the chain of transmission. This will be voluntary at first because we trust everyone to do the right thing. But we can quickly make it mandatory if that's what it takes.
They have made up this bug, made up this disease, made up the death figures by testing people and getting some false positives and saying they've died with COVID-19. And now they're throwing it all back on you. If you don't do this, you're a bad person and you're going to kill people. Not that you're awake and you know it's a pile of bollocks. No, 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 you're going to be a killer. That's what this guy's saying. And also he's saying make it mandatory, but he's using the word must. Well, from the dictionary, I thought must was a mandatory term.
Because if we don't collectively make this work, then the only way forward is to keep the lockdown. Put better, the more people follow the instructions, the safer we will be, and the faster we can safely lift the lockdown.
So no lockdown lifting if you don't comply. This sounds like blackmail to me. And if, of course, you don't follow it, you're one of those awful people that are keeping people locked up.
So do it for the people you love. Do it for your community. Do it for the NHS. And do it for all those frontline workers who've done so much and gone out every day to put themselves at risk to keep you and your family safe.
Again, they're throwing the onus on you. These are the guys that are wrecking the economy, putting people out of work, getting rid of small businesses, and they want you to carry on with this nonsense and trying to put the blame on you if you don't follow the shit. Now, Hans Koch has kept a very, very straight face. Now just watch what happens. Towards the end, he loses it and he breaks into a sly smile with duping delight.
And in return for following those instructions, you'll have the knowledge that, when the call came, you did your bit at a time when it really mattered.
Every man and woman will therefore prepare himself to do his duty, whatever it may be, with special pride and care.
When the whole country, who are desperate to see their families, were counting on you to do the right thing, you did your bit to bring us all closer together.
You did your bit to bring us all closer together. Closer together. Closer together.
And closer to the day when we can be reunited.
So he kept a straight face most of the time. There was a little wobble occasionally, but in the end, the smile, the sly smile of duping delight appeared on Hans Koch's face. And he's telling you, this guy, deadly serious things that you've got to do your bit to be able to let people out of the lockdown from their made-up fake virus and fake disease. And expects people to trust him when he smiles as he's telling people this. What a piece of shite.
From 9 a.m. tomorrow, in addition, if you are contacted by an NHS test and trace advisor advising you that you must isolate, then you must do that whether you have symptoms or not.
Again, you must. So you must isolate even if you're perfectly healthy. How much further are they going to push this bullshit? Wake up, people, wake up.
Now, I also know that for those without symptoms who receive that call, I fully acknowledge that this is a big ask and that you're going to make a sacrifice. But it's for a purpose, and the purpose is the safety of everyone.
In my opinion, the purpose is to create as much mayhem as possible so people are begging for vaccines when they come out.
I'm now going to ask Baroness Harding to set out some more of the details of NHS Test and Trace, and then Professor Van Tam to take us through the daily statistics.
Thank you, Secretary of State. This is a brand new service which has been launched at scale in a very short space of time.
Which has been launched at scale in a very short space of time.
And as the Secretary of State has just said, we all have a part to play, and it will only succeed if each of us does our bit. I want you to feel safe and confident to play an active part in NHS Test and Trace, for you, your loved ones, and our country. We do need you to follow the following 3 steps. Step 1. If you have one or more of the symptoms of coronavirus, a fever, a new continuous cough, or a loss of your sense of taste or smell, you must immediately self-isolate. Step 2. You should then book a test on the nhs.uk/coronavirus site, or if you don't have internet access, by dialing 119. Do not leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, you will then be contacted by the NHS Test and Trace service within 24 hours. All contact tracers have been undergoing training and induction.
All contact tracers have been undergoing training and induction.
Step 3. NHS Test and Trace will help you establish who you've been in close contact with, and so who you might have infected, and will gather their contact details. This could include members of your household or someone you've been within 2 metres of for more than 15 minutes. You will also be given clinical advice and support for dealing with the disease yourself. NHS Test and Trace in turn will get in touch with those contacts. So if you've been exposed to an infected person, they will be in contact with you. You will then be instructed by the NHS to self-isolate for 14 days. Even if you don't have symptoms or you feel perfectly well, you need to follow these instructions. This individual and collective effort is vital if we're to keep the rate of infection down and carefully lift the lockdown. Over the past few days and weeks, I've spoken to a huge number of people, and I've heard real support and a desire to make this work. We all want to get back to a more normal way of life.
We all want to get back to a more normal way of life.
Now this one just can't stop smiling. There was a crack up there, but just wait, because the best is yet to come. Take it away, Dildo.
And this is an important step on that journey. NHS Test and Trace is one of the most ambitious and complex projects that any of us have ever worked on.
Is one of the most ambitious. Is one of the most ambitious. Is one of the most ambitious.
So even if this was true, how can you take two individuals that smile when they're telling you life-changing information and how to protect yourself against this so-called disease? How can you take them seriously when they laugh? This whole thing is ludicrous. They are just spinning out and making this thing last as long as they can, and then everybody's going to be scrambling around to get drugs and to get vaccines to cure the fake disease. And once the mobile app comes out, this thing is just going to be incredibly disruptive. You're going to be made to isolate, and your family isolate, and your contacts isolate. It's bloody ridiculous. Please stop putting up with this nonsense, people. Please stop. You're bringing us all down with you. So difficult to swallow all this bullshit. But that's all I've got to say for now. So I'll say thanks for listening, goodbye, and we'll play out with these deceiving individuals that have just been in this presentation.
Is one of the most ambitious. Closer together. Is one of the most ambitious. Closer together. Is one of the most ambitious. Closer together.